Hi, welcome to DragTheBar. My name is Bill Roberti. I'll be your instructor for this series called Backgammon Basics. I've been playing backgammon a long time, more than 30 years. I've won a few tournaments, written a few books, and in this series I'm going to try to show you what the game's all about. We'll build a solid foundation here that will let you hold your own and then some if you're playing with friends. And if your goal is to get good and start playing online or in tournaments, I'll get you started on that process as well. Backgammon is a really great game, maybe the best two-player gambling game ever invented. It can be played and enjoyed on many levels. It's a great game to play with friends for small stakes, but you can also travel around the world, play in big tournaments for big prizes. There's backgammon clubs in most big cities where aficionados meet and butt heads for hundreds of dollars a point. Now, it's pretty easy to learn the basics of backgammon, but it's also a little deceptive. Beneath the surface, it's a game that's tremendously complex. It blends strategy, tactics, psychology, and quite a bit of nerve. If I had to play someone for high stakes, I'd want to play them in backgammon, not poker. In poker, somebody can win your whole stack with a lucky hand, but in backgammon, a weaker player is in a world of trouble. Now, the purpose of this series, Backgammon Basics, is to provide a solid introduction to backgammon for anybody from complete beginners to those who know a little bit about the game but want to learn more, and they want to learn the right way. So we'll start in this video taking you step by step, showing you how the game is played. I'll explain the rules, how to move the pieces, how to use the doubling cube, and that's really what's going to determine whether you're a winner or a loser. The doubling cube, which involves raising the stakes in the game, putting the pressure on your opponent, is really the key factor once you know the basics of how the checkers move. In the next couple of videos after this one, I'll go through some good illustrative games. I'll show you what backgammon looks like when two good players meet. And then in later videos, we'll look at opening moves, how to reply to the opening move, and how to play some of the different kinds of games that come up, like blitzes, primes, and back games. By the end of the series, you should be a pretty competent player, able to at least hold your own against friends, or if you're playing for low stakes on some of the online sites. Now, this first episode I've called On the Ground Floor. And this episode is really for somebody who's heard about the game, they think it sounds interesting, they want to get started learning how to play, and maybe they've got some friends who play, but the friends don't have time to teach them. So you're looking for a place to really learn the game from scratch. Now, that's no problem, and that's what we're going to do here in this first episode. If you already know the moves and a little bit about how to use the cube and stuff, you might want to move on to episode 2 in the series that will come up later. But for right now, this first episode is for people who really want to start from scratch. So let's get going. Okay, we're going to start with a backgammon board. Now, this is a backgammon board on your screen in front of you. Right now it's empty, there's no pieces on it, but let's take a look at what the different features of the board are. First of all, you've got 24 points, and each one of these triangular spaces, that's called a point. And the points are like squares on a chessboard. This is where you put your pieces as you're playing the game. Notice the points are alternately colored, so it makes it a little easier to see. You've got a dark brown, a light brown, and stuff. So that's where your men go. Now, if you look on the edges of the board, you can see that the points are all numbered, starting up here in the upper left-hand corner, point number 24, working your way around here to point 13, the upper right, then dropping down here, the lower right, you've got point 12, and 11, 10, all the way down to point 1, which is in your lower left-hand corner. Backgammon's basically a race, and the players move around the board. One side, which will be black in our diagrams, is going to go clockwise, starting up here and moving this way, and then white is going to go counterclockwise. The basic idea is to set your men on these points, move them around the board using the dice, and eventually start to take them off the board. Now, this space here in the middle that I'm moving my cursor around on, that's called the bar. And the bar is like a holding pen. If you have a checker that gets hit, it comes off the board and it goes up on the bar. And from the bar, it has to start the race all over again. Whether it's a black checker or a white checker, it has to go back to the beginning and make it all the way around the board once more. So you'd rather not get your men hit and sent to the bar because that costs you a lot of time in the race. These areas over here, they're called trays, and that's where you put your checkers after you bear them off. And we're going to cover how you take checkers off the board later. But right now, as you can see on this empty board, all of the checkers on both sides are currently off the board here. This little white square here with the 1 in it, that represents the doubling cube. And we've got a little representation on the right of 2 dice, and we'll get to those more in a second. But that's how the board itself is laid out. Okay, so far we've just seen an empty board, so now it's time to put some pieces on it. Black and white each start with 15 pieces. They're also called checkers, sometimes they're called men. Let's start by setting up black's checkers in their starting position, and it looks like this. Okay, now black now has 15 checkers on the board. He's got 2 back here on the 24 point. He's got 5 more on the 13 point, which we also call the midpoint. Down here, he's got 3 checkers on the point numbered 8. And finally, he's got 5 checkers on his 6 point. Now, black moves clockwise around the board, and his goal in the course of the game is to get all 15 of his checkers in this quarter of the board, the one with the points labeled 1 through 6. That's called black's inner board, and as he rolls the dice, he tries to move his men around until eventually they all get in here. Once all 15 of his checkers are in here, then he can start to bear them off. Now, I said we call this quadrant black's inner board. This quadrant over here with the points from 7 to 12, that's called black's outer board. Now let's set up white's checkers and see what his starting position looks like. Okay, and there's the 15 white checkers, and as you can see, his starting position is a mirror image of black's. This quadrant with the points 24 to 19, that's white's inner board. And white moves counterclockwise, and his goal is to get all 15 of his checkers around until they're sitting in this quadrant, points 24 to 19, and then white can start to bear off. Now, as you can see, with black moving clockwise and white moving counterclockwise, we got a little problem here because the pieces are going to run into each other. And that is what makes backgammon a lot more than just a simple race. The 2 armies have to pass through each other on their way to their destination, which are their respective home boards. And it's possible for them to hit each other in the process, send the opponent back to the start. And it's also possible to block your opponent in so he can't move and he can't get his men out. Now we're going to see a lot more about how that's done in the future. But remember that the main goal, backgammon, is still mainly a race. Black moves clockwise and tries to get to here. White moves counterclockwise and tries to get to there. Now, by this point, you're probably wondering, well, how do we actually move these checkers? And the answer is with the dice. Black starts out with 2 black dice. White has 2 white dice. And when it's your turn to move, you roll the dice, and then you move your men according to the numbers on the dice. And let's look at a quick example here. Suppose it's black's turn here, and he throws his dice and he rolls a 4-2. Now, a 4-2 is not the same as a 6. What a 4-2 means is you can move one checker 4 pips, and you can move a different checker 2 pips, or you can move the same checker 4 pips and then 2 pips for a total of 6. So you can make the move all with one checker, but you don't have to. You can break it up into moves with 2 checkers. Now here's an example of moving a single checker. I'm going to move this back checker here starting on the 24. First I'm going to move it 4 pips up to the 20. Notice that's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'll keep it going. I'm going to move it 2 more, the 19 and then the 18. So it'll stop here on the 18 point. And if you notice from where I started, I've moved a single checker 6 pips. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. The bar, notice, didn't count. Right after the 19 point comes the 18 point. So there's a move of 6 with a single checker. Or I could do something else. Why don't I start and I'll move one of these checkers here on the 6 point. I'll move that 2 pips. So I'll move it from the 6 down to the 4. And then I'll move a checker here on the 8 point a total of 4 pips, and that'll take it to the 4 also. So it goes there. Now, which of these two plays is better? Well, the answer to that is it's the second play. And the main reason that it's better is because I moved these two checkers separately, but I brought them together and made a new point. I made the 4 point. And at this point, we're going to need to stop for a second and learn the difference between made points and blots. Now here's a key concept in backgammon. If you have 2 or more checkers on a point, you own that point. That point belongs to you. It's called a made point, and those are very, very important. If you look at this position right now, black has 5 made points. He owns the 24 point. He owns the 13 point. Remember I said 2 or more checkers, so more is just extra. But he owns the 13, he owns the 8, he owns the 6, and he owns the 4 point. White cannot land on any of those points in his turn. They belong to black. And here's the reason why that's so important. Let's say that it's now white's turn. Sorry, we'll make it white to move. Say that's white's turn and white rolls a 5-3. And let's say for some reason he really wants to move one of his 2 back checkers all the way with that roll. Now the first thing you want to notice is that the point that's 8 pips away from white is this 9 point out here, and that's open. And that means that that's where white wants to go. But look what happens when he tries to move there. Remember that a roll of 5-3 is not a roll of 8. It's a roll of a 5 and a roll of a 3. And you can take either one first, but you have to play one and then the other. But here's the problem. If white tries to move one of these checkers here on the 1 point, well, it turns out that the point that's 3 away is the 4 point, and black owns that. And the point that's 5 away is the 6 point, and black owns that as well. So there's no way for these white checkers to get out here to the 9 point because they'd have to stop on either the 4 or the 6 first. White would either have to move a 3 and then a 5, or a 5 and then a 3, but black owns those points. That means they're blocked. That means white cannot, in his turn, move one of these 2 back checkers. So that's a key idea. Now, the other, of course, advantage of owning a point is it's a safe landing spot for your other checkers. If you own the point, a checker can move there, one of your own checkers, and it's perfectly safe. It can't be bothered by your opponent. But now, let's suppose you have just one checker on a point. For example, let's give white a slightly different roll here. We'll give him a roll of 3-2. And let's suppose that with white's 3-2 play, he decided he was going to move the checkers on his 12 point. So we'll have him move one of these checkers. Now to move one of these checkers 3 pips, it's going to go to from the 12 to the 15. And notice, by the way, that the backgammon board is connected here on this end. The point that comes after the 13 is the 12. The point that comes after the 12 is the 13. So if white is moving the checkers on his 12 point, they're going to go to the 15 and the 14 with this 3-2. So let's suppose he makes that play. He takes 2 checkers off his 12 point. He puts one on the 15, one on the 14. Now it's a perfectly good play of a 3-2, but now he only has 1 checker on each of these points. And those single checkers, they're called blots. And blots are vulnerable. If your opponent can move to one of those points, he can hit your blot and he can send it all the way back to the bar. For example, let's suppose that white made this play and it's now black's turn, And let's suppose that black now rolls the dice and rolls a 6-4. Now here's what he can do. He can take one of his checkers here on the 24 point, and he can move it 10 spaces, all the way up here to the 14, by playing either first a 6 and then a 4, or he could play first the 4 and then the 6. But either way, that checker makes it all the way out here to the 14 point, and when it gets there, here's what the position looks like. Black hits the single white checker and sends it all the way back to the bar. Now, from white's point of view, the bar really represents this space over here, if there was such a space, because that checker is going to have to come in way back here at the beginning for white's race and start all over again. So blots are vulnerable. If you may have to leave blots, but remember that when you do, if your opponent can move to that point, he can hit you and send you all the way back to the beginning. Now, the other thing to remember about checkers that are on the bar is that those checkers have to re-enter the board before you can move anyone else anywhere on the board. You must get the checkers in off the bar first. That's very important. So it's now white's turn here, and now white is going to roll the dice, and he's going to try to roll numbers that will get this checker in somewhere. Now let's suppose, for example, that he shakes the dice, he rolls a 5-4. Now that's actually a pretty good shot. Now the first thing he has to do is get this checker in, and remember it starts here. So to move that checker 4 spaces, he would go 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, not going to work because black owns that point. But he can enter with the 5. He goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This point is open, so that's where white has to re-enter that checker from the bar. Then he's got a 4 left to play, and in fact he's got a pretty good 4. He can move one of the checkers from the 1 point up to the 5 point where it can join its companion. And now white has not only re-entered, but he's entered and he made a point of his own. Now this point we call an anchor, and it's a very good structure to have. An anchor just means that you own one of the high points in your opponent's inner board. In this case, that's black's inner board, and white owns the 5 point, which is one of the highest points in the board. That's very good structure because it prevents you from getting blocked in by your opponent as he starts to fill in these points the way black made the 4 point early on. Make an anchor. That's a very good early strategy. It'll prevent you from getting blocked in, and it'll give you a much better chance to win the race later on. All right, now we're going to look at another little feature of the game that gives it some extra zip and excitement, and that's what happens when you throw a double on the dice. For example, it's now black's turn. Suppose he shakes the dice and rolls 5-5, what we call double 5s. Now, doubles are a very special roll because when you throw a double, you don't just move 2 5s, you actually move 4 5s. And that means you gain tremendously in the race. You can move a lot of different checkers, and it's really tremendously strong to throw doubles in the game. Now let's take a look at this position and see just what black can do with these double 5s. The first thing we want to notice is that he unfortunately can't move the checker on the 24 point because white owns the point that's 5 pips away from the 24, namely the 19. That belongs to white. That means black can't land there, and since all he can do are move 5s, he can't move that checker at all. So he's blocked. However, black can do some good things with this. For example, he can take his 2 checkers here on the 8 point, and he can move them down to the 3 point, which is 5 pips away. So let's do that. And then he can take these 2 checkers on the 6 point, and he can move them down to the 1 point, hitting white's blot in the process and sending that to the bar. So let's see how the position looks after we do that. White goes to the bar, and black moves those 2 checkers down to the 1. So now in a single turn, black has accomplished a lot. He's made the 3 point in his inner board, he's made the 1 point in his inner board, and he put white on the bar, all with a single roll. Throwing doubles is part of the luck that's inherent in the game. If one player throws a lot more doubles in the course of the game than their opponent, they're probably going to win. That's analogous in poker to the guy who just picks up a lot of big premium pairs in the course of a round. He's probably going to win a lot of hands as well. Now, next question to ask is, how do you decide who goes first in the game? And the answer to that is that on the very opening roll, each side throws only one dice. And whoever throws the higher numbered dice wins the opening roll. He gets to move first, and his move is the sum of the two dice, his die and his opponent's die. So for example, if black and white roll the dice to start the game, black rolls a 4, white rolls a 2, then black is going to go first, and his opening roll is going to be a 4-2. If it happens that both players roll one die to start the game and they roll the same number, like let's say both players rolled a 6, in that case they would simply roll over until finally they had thrown dice that were different, and then the game would begin. Okay, so we've covered a lot about moving the pieces around, where you can go, how you use the dice. And by now you might well be asking, well, how do you actually win a game of backgammon? And the answer is you win the game by getting your checkers in the home board and bearing them off before your opponent can do the same thing. So let's take a look at how a game of backgammon might end. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up something that's very close to the end of the game here. Here's white's position. And here's black's position. Now notice that black at this point has finally gotten all 15 of his checkers into his home board, his inner board. White is almost there. He still has one checker on the outside, hasn't quite made it yet. So black is ready to begin taking his checkers off. White still has to get this checker home before he can start the process. And let's take a look at how that might go. Black goes, let's say it's black's roll here. Let's say black rolls a 4-3. Well, with a 4-3, he can take one of the checkers on the 4 point and move it 1, 2, 3, 4 pips, take it off the board. So he moves the 4. Then with the 3, he can take one of the checkers on the 3 point, do the same thing, move that 3 pips and off the board. So there black has played a 4-3. He's put 2 checkers over here in his bear-off tray. Now it's white's turn to move, and let's say white rolls a 2-1. Well, unfortunately, white can't bear any men off because he still has to take care of this checker. So let's say he moves it 2, and then he moves it 1. He's still not home, but he'll be home next turn no matter what. Okay, it's black's turn again. We'll give him a 5-2. 5-2 for black. And now with the 5, notice he'll take a checker off his 5 point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that bears off. And with the 2, he'll take a checker off his 2 point. So that checker goes. And now it's white's turn again. And let's say white rolls a 4-3. Okay, with the 4, he can bear this checker in. So let's say he moves that 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to go down here to the 22 point. And then with the 3, he can finally remove one of these checkers. And for him, the 3s take a checker off the point labeled 22 here. So there goes his 3, and now white has a checker off as well. So the players are just going to continue in this manner, bearing off their checkers. Let's say black rolls a 6-1 next. He can take a checker off the 6 point, and he can take a checker off the 1 point. And now it's white's turn, and white rolls, let's say, 5-4. Now the 5's pretty easy. Notice that white will just remove a checker here from the point labeled 20. He'll move it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and take that off the board with the 5. But now the 4 is a little bit of a problem. White could bear off a checker if he had one on the 21 point, but that point is empty. But he still has to play a 4. So what he's going to do is play a legal 4 from the 19 point down to the 23 point. So he'll move a checker from the 19, 4 pips down to the 23. He didn't get to bear off because the point that was 4 away for him was actually empty, but he had checkers on higher points which could legally move a 4, so he had to do that. Now it comes around to black's turn, and black rolls a 6-6. That's a pretty good shot. Well, first of all, he can take the 2 checkers off the 6 point. And now he's still got 2 6s left. And although he doesn't have anybody on the 6 point, once your high points are cleared, you can use big numbers to bear checkers off the next lowest point. So in this case, black will use his last 2 6s to take the 2 checkers off the 5 point. White's turn again. Let's say white this time rolls a 6 and a 1. The 6 will take a checker here off the 19 point. The 1 is going to take a checker off the 24 point. It's pretty clear who's going to win this game. And now black shoots and black rolls a 4-2. 4 bears a checker off the 4. A 2 bears a checker off the 2. Black is almost there. White's turn. Let's say white rolls double 5s. Pretty good shot. It's probably not going to be enough for him to win the game. With his first 2 5s, he can take the 2 checkers off the 20 point. With the last 2 5s, he can't bear anyone off because he has to use those to move 2 checkers from the 19 point down to the 24 point. And now it's black's turn. And finally, black rolls 4-4. With the 4, in the first 4, he takes a checker off the 4. The second 4, he takes a checker off the 3. The third 4, he takes a checker off the 1. He doesn't need the last 4, and that's enough to win the game for him. Now, in this case, black bore off all his checkers. He won the game. White bore off some of his checkers, but he still lost. Now, that's called winning a single game. That's what happens when you bear off all your checkers and your opponent bears off some, but not all of his checkers. But that's not the only way a game can end. It's also possible to win what's called a double game or a gammon, where you win twice the stake you were playing for. And you can even win a triple game or a backgammon, which is worth 3 times the stake. Now let's take a look at this next position. I'm going to set a position in which black has only 2 checkers left. White hasn't borne anyone off yet. He still has a checker here in the outfield. And it's black's turn to roll. And let's suppose that black rolls a 5-2. He bears off a checker from his 5 point. He bears off a checker from his 2 point with the 2. And now look what's happened. He has borne off all his checkers. And white has not yet borne off any checkers. That means black wins a double game, a gammon, and he wins twice whatever the stake was that they were playing for. Now here's an example of the worst that might happen. Again, let's say it's black's turn. He's now got 4 checkers left. White in the same position as before, but now white has this checker back here in black's inner board. Now suppose black rolls 3-3. Well, he's got 4 3s to play. He takes a checker off the 3, another checker off the 3, and then he bears the 2 checkers off the 1 point. He got all 15 of his checkers off. Not only did white not bear off a checker, but white still had a checker in black's home board. That's called a backgammon or a triple game. You win 3 times the stake. And that occurs when your opponent is left either with a checker in your inner board or a checker on the bar and no checkers off. Backgammons are fairly rare, but they do happen, and they cost you a lot of points when they do. All right, we're almost done now. We've shown how to set up the board. We've shown how to use the dice, how to move the pieces, and how to make points and hit blots, and finally win the game by bearing off all your checkers. But there's one more important thing we still have to talk about before we stop for today, and that's this thing, the big block in the center of the board. It's called the doubling cube. It's got numbers on it starting at 1 and going up to 64. And it revolutionized backgammon when it was invented in the 1920s. It turned it from a sort of a slow-paced game that people would play at their summer houses for a little recreation to a really fast-paced, high-stakes gambling game, which is how we know it today. Now, to see how the cube works, I'm going to set up back in the starting position. Now we're going to take a look at the first few moves of a new game, and we'll see the cube come into play very quickly. So here we are. Here we are in a starting position. Now let's say that black wins the opening roll, and he rolls a 6-4. And we'll suppose for now that he decides to move one of the checkers on the 24 point all the way out to the 14. And that's a perfectly good way to start the game. So he moves it 6 to the 18 point, and then he keeps it going another 4 pips to the 14 point. And now, let's say that white rolls next, and white rolls 5-5. Now, as we've seen, doubles are great rolls at most stages of the game. And here, what white is going to do with his 4-5s is he's going to move 2 checkers from the 17 point down to the 22 point. And then he's going to move 2 more checkers from the 19 point to the 24 point. And meanwhile, that's going to put black up on the bar. Okay, so white grabbed an early lead. He rolled double 5s. He made 2 inner board points, and he put black on the bar. Very nice. And now it's black's turn to roll again. And let's say that black rolls a 6-3. Well, remember, black has to enter from the bar before he can do anything else. But, oops, he can't enter with the 6 because a 6 from the bar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that takes him to the 19 point. That's blocked. And a 3 from the bar, 1, 2, 3, that takes him to the 22 point. That's blocked as well. So black loses his entire turn. And now white can elect to double. And to double, he takes the cube, he turns it from 1 to 2, and he puts it on black's side of the board. And now black has a choice. He can either give up the game and surrender whatever the stake was, or he can elect to keep the cube at 2 and play for twice the stake. So for example, if the players had agreed to play for $10 a point, in effect white is saying let's make it $20 a point. And black has to either go along with that and play for $20 a point or give up the game and pay his opponent $10. Now, if he decides to accept the cube, all the stakes get doubled. So losing a single game is going to cost him 20 bucks. Losing a gammon or a double game is going to cost him 40 bucks. And losing a backgammon or a triple game will cost him $60. So the stakes have gotten significantly higher. However, accepting the cube does come with a bonus. And the bonus is that black owns the cube. White can never double again. The cube sits on black's side, black owns it, and only black gets to decide if the cube ever goes higher. Now, if black decides to play on, accept the cube at 2, and then the game turns around yet again in the future to where black has the advantage, black can take that cube, send it up to the top, and redouble the stakes yet again to 4. And now the question is being put to white. At that point, somewhere in the future, not in this position, at that point white has to decide whether to give up 2 points or now to play on with a single game worth 4 times the stake, a double game worth 8 times the stake, and a triple game worth 12 times the stake. So if white doubles black to 2, black takes, and then let's say at some point in the future black ships it back to 4, white takes, and black wins a backgammon, that's going to be $120 at $10 a point. So our game that started for what seemed like very small stakes escalated very quickly. Now, between two players who play the checkers equally well, the proper use of the doubling cube will usually decide who wins the money and who loses the money over the course of a given session. And we're going to have a lot more to say about using the cube in future episodes of this series. But for right now, let's just remember that the cube is very, very important. And skill with the cube is almost as important as skill using the checkers. Okay, so that brings us to the end of episode 1. And I hope you enjoyed this little introduction to backgammon. Now, if you're new to backgammon and you're seeing all this for the first time, I'd recommend that you take a little break and then sit down and play through the video again. It might seem like we've covered a lot here, but everything will fall into place pretty quickly as you play a few games yourself and get used to what's going on. Now, before looking at the next video, there's a few other things you might like to do. If you want to try playing backgammon online, you can play for real money or play money on the site Black Chip Poker, which is part of the Merge network. You can also sign up there through the My Account page right here on DragTheBar. You'll also get the best poker rakeback rates available on the network. And the other good thing is, of course, the online sites won't let you make an illegal move. So it's an easy way to learn. Hop in, play a few games, and see how the games play out. If you'd like a good beginner's book to look at, I wrote one called Backgammon for Winners. It's available on Amazon or in most bookstores, and it's a quick, easy introduction to the game. It'll reinforce a lot of what we're talking about right here. Now, in the next couple of episodes, we're going to play through a couple of really high-level master games, and from start to finish, and I'll annotate them for you, explain what's going on at each stage of the game, and you'll start to get a feel in those games for good checker play and good doubling strategy. You'll start to see what it all looks like. So until then, this is Bill Roberti signing off for DragTheBar, and hope you enjoyed the video.